The first time I saw Flavor Flav in a full tongue kiss moment with Tiffany New York Pollard on the series Flavor of Love, I threw up a little in my mouth, but not for the reasons you think. My mantra regarding popular culture and social media is if you're willing to do it, hey, guess what? I'm willing to watch. Reality television is morphing into another genre that rests between fiction, fantasy, reality, and then another layer of reality. Today, in this episode, I just want to kiki a bit and share my reality television journey, fascination, fixation, and the ways in which it has added another layer of reality within our already complex society and in my already complex head. Welcome to the Unseeable Black Women's Podcast, a sanctuary for Black women born in the States, a space where our stories are heard, valued, and explored. Let's begin. A doctoral program is a lonely ass place. Okay. I was working on my PhD in women's and gender studies. The experience was a mix of amazing and monstrous. But a finished dissertation is the best dissertation one could possess. My area of interest was vast, but very specific to Black masculinity and Black women's femininity. To buy time, my classmate and I would get our rations from the dining hall and post up in one of our rooms to watch Flavor of Love. Flavor of Love was a reality dating show that aired on VH1 from January 2006 to May 2008, starring rapper Flavor Flav from the hip hop group Public Enemy. The show began as a result of Flavor Flav's failed relationship. Oh my God, help us. With Brigitte Nielsen, showcased on VH1's Strange Love, and their appearance on The Surreal Life. Thanks to the general interest, the audience had grown towards Flavor Flav's life, and Flavor of Love was a huge hit, particularly with the second season finale becoming the second highest rated non sports basic cable show of 2006. The format of the show revolved around the rapper dating a group of 20 women who competed for his affection. The rapper would date all of these women over several weeks in the hopes of finding his ideal partner. One of the people that I can never get out of my mind, who I consider as one of the greatest reality television stars of all times, is Tiffany Pollard. Watching the show felt like it could have been a practicum. It should have been required. It was full of outlandishness, debauchery, and lust for a man that wore a big ass clock around his neck, gold teeth, and decades older than his potential prey. I mean, partners. I could list my top 50 moments on the show. That's how edutaining it was. We would take turns inserting our theoretical framing of the show, addressing the misogyny, hip hop, and the first set of women some will call thirst traps. I would say they were just young women looking for an initiation into stardom. But my question was, at what price? So let's talk about the working definition of reality television. Britannica defines reality TV as a television genre encompassing a wide variety of purportedly unscripted programming. Because the genre is so heterogeneous, it can be difficult to fully define. In her book, True Story: What Reality TV Says About Us, American sociologist Danielle Lindemann defines reality TV as a set of programs that feature non actors, though they may also feature actors and reenactments, and make a claim to reality, whether or not there is any sort of scripting actually taking place, but are intended mainly to entertain rather than inform. Although reality TV originated in the United States, it has a broad-based appeal throughout the world, and it often attracts younger viewers. Reality television has several iterations, and I think it's important to always give context to whatever I discuss. When we think about reality television, we want to go back to something like Flavor Flav, but we have to go much further back than that. One of the first shows I remember was Candid Camera, and that started in 1948, where people were being filmed responding to pranks. That was one of the first reality shows. Then we move into the 70s. And one of the shows that I used to watch growing up in the 70s. So, yeah, I age myself. So what? I'm well seasoned. But one of the shows that I enjoyed was That's Incredible. And then by the 1980s, shows began to dramatize true series or true stories surrounding crime and passion, such as America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries. Now, um, if this was a different conversation, I would be also talking about what's going on in Black America in 1948, in 1970, and in 1980, because it is very important. So I encourage you to look it up. The 80s also introduced the reality series Cops, which followed police officers on the beat confronting crime and arresting individuals on air. Hmm. Wonder what role the war on drugs and the conservative movement had to play in this particular show. By the late 80s, there was a show called An American Family, which was the first of its kind introduced to the public sphere. And it talked about, the life of a family in California. Their name was the Louds, and the parents were navigating, adjusting to divorce, as well as their son Lance's gay lifestyle. Currently, reality TV captures the attention of nearly 80% of adult viewers. We say reality isn't real, but there's something about it that resonates with our experiences. There is a notion about reality, real, and social realities. I talk about this often. Something that you have processed in your mind and you're able to register it is real. Something you touch could be considered something that's real. Then we have reality, the existence, the way in which we live, how things play themselves out on the ground. What does it really look like just in an everyday life when thinking about reality? Okay. And then you have social reality. And social realities are based on our social identities and how we operate and move in the world. So when you understand your social identities and dynamics of race and gender and class and all of these other categories, there's a social reality that exists that is often, especially for Black women, inescapable. When we walk into a room, we are already marked as a particular type of person with a particular type of disposition, with a particular type of way, with a particular ancestry. That's a social reality. That's something we can't escape. I can never escape being a Black woman, nor do I want to. But when we add that layer of reality television, then that's where it gets real sticky and real nasty and funky, because you're not only dealing with the social realities, but you're dealing with reality television as a genre. And then it's kind of intersecting and running into and colliding with the social realities that occur in people's lives. So, for example, Flavor of Love, while we look at that as just entertainment and we think that's funny and we think it's entertaining, there's also something to be said about a man in his 40s pursuing women in their 20s or maybe early 30s, and his viability because he's a part of hip hop culture, not for who he is, but for what he does. And then even the way in which the show played itself out with the dynamics of the dating and the courting was interesting, because it was a mixed bag of tradition and non-tradition. When you consider, one of the things that occurred was that they would get to see, each other's family. So meeting somebody's family is very, very freaking Brady Bunch traditional. While people are slobbing down each other, women shitting on the floor, fighting, all these things are going on, but there's still this respectability to politics that plays itself out. So all of those things were happening at one time. And what was interesting about this particular moment in reality television is that a lot of people weren't famous. A lot of people weren't known before they got on television. Now, Flavor Flav, of course, is an international artist, and he is known for his music, and he's also known for some of his politics and politicking, I like to say. But one of the things that was interesting is that none of those women that came on the show were celebrities. They were all women who were maybe aspiring to celebrity, but they hadn't yet reached it. So there was a level of themselves that was authentic and somewhat pure to some extent. There's something about intimacy and trying to find yourself, but then you put that on top of trying to find yourself on national television. That's a whole lot. And I think what I loved most about Tiffany was her most authentic self. And we see decades later, she's still showing up as that same girl. And so there are some valuable lessons. The reason I love that show is because of its somewhat purity. And I use that in very, very, very loose terms. But it was a show that really wasn't managed. It wasn't constructed in the same way that we see reality television today, where everything is a scene and everything is a moment and every word is important. And all of the things that happen were just naturally happening. When she calls boots, there's something gutter butt about boots. I'll never forget that. you know, when Goldie was singing strawberries and champagne and throwing up in the bathroom, I'll never forget that. You know, when she said that, that Hoops, I'm sorry, y'all, Hoops, and what's that girl name? Funky, what's her name? Funky, what's her name? The white girl. Anyway, when she just kept saying that Hoops was they were lesbian lovers and Hoops was a stud, that shit had me hollering. But all of those things were natural things that were occurring within the environment. None of that stuff was orchestrated. I guarantee you none of that was orchestrated. All of that was like people just coming off the top of their heads and say what they were saying. The other thing that made Flavor of Love so interesting is that it lacked what some would call racial paranoia. That's when institutionalized racism and these like levels of intensity around surveillance of race are taking place. But hip hop culture, to some extent, and I say this also very lightly because I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do think it's a point we should consider. Hip hop possesses a social pH balance at times. That is one space where people can enter into it, and not that the politics of race or any of those other identities disappear, but there is something about that connection, and that's music overall, but there's something very specific about hip hop culture that sometimes balances out some of those complications. So while racism did exist, and while we could argue whether Pumpkin, that was a little funky name. I don't like her much. But whether Pumpkin was racist or not, whether it was inappropriate to talk about the pretty girl who was biracial, Asian and black, talking about her exotic look, those kinds of things, they weren't highlighted as much because it was about falling in love with a superstar. And that took precedent over everything else. So Flavor of Love was aired January 1st, 2006. The same year, Facebook and Twitter were launched. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Flavor of Love was a trailblazer. It tells us that social media was not influencing how these women were showing up every day. They weren't they weren't getting all of this attention and getting this actual live feedback from followers and from celebrities and from other media outlets. They were somewhat insulated and somewhat in their own little bubble because they were not being influenced externally. I really do believe that's what made the show a little more pure than other shows, in the sense of social media has distorted a lot of our realities in a myriad of different ways. So 2006 is really interesting to think about Flavor of Love being launched, as well as Facebook and Twitter. Now, October 2007, this is where it gets deep, y'all. E Network airs Keeping Up with the Kardashians. That show shaped the ways, and this is the gospel according to Meredith, but it's the gospel according to Dr. Davis as well. The show shaped the ways in which social media leveraged influence, notions of talent, and aspirational wealth, and this acquiring of the American dream, right? Because you have this family, Kardashians, they're Armenian, and they live a very, very white life. If you were to just see them, they are white folk. There's nothing other than the dark hair that would indicate that they're anything other than white. And so they enter the scene of reality television, and it literally shaped everything from the way people's asses looked to the way people wore clothes to the shape of people's lips. All of those kinds of things were all riding, no pun intended, all riding on Kim Kardashian. So in October of 2007, we have the airing of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Guess what happens in February 2007? The Ray J and KK sex tapes were leaked. So part of her celebrity was very much tied to the fact that she had been sleeping with a celebrity. And so here you have this person that is not famous. I would not call her famous. I wouldn't even call her influencer back then. She probably was well connected. She had a lot of different networks. She would navigate. She was a stylist for some people. So she had her own lane in her own space, but she was not recognized. She was in the backdrop. And so it's interesting to see that could launch a career for a white woman that will land her billions of dollars. I'm gonna just sit with that for a second, y'all. Her backshot video is why she is where she is. And there's nobody that can tell me otherwise. Nobody would have been thinking twice about her. Nobody. Yes, her father was Robert Kardashian. He was the attorney for O.J. Simpson trial. So yeah, there's a level of celebrity that her family had, but it wasn't until we were introduced to her tricks and treats in bed was there any attention given to her. It was a one of a kind moment where you have this interracial intersection of social status and celebrity. And you have that coming together and it's coalescing and not just a moment where a sex tape is being revealed, which is, sex tapes have been revealed before. That's not a big deal. But for someone to gain notoriety to the extent that they become a celebrity, to the extent that their show is now in syndication, to the extent that they have multiple businesses and make billions of dollars. That shit doesn't happen anywhere except for America and except for a white woman. So today, reality television is real, but it's scripted. So it's a different kind of, it's a different kind of morphing in the way it which is shaped. It's different now. It's scripted. And we call it scripted because of storylines. So someone's particular storyline, whether it's marriage problems, struggles with friendships, family dysfunction, or whatever, all of those things are really occurring. They're not made up, but how you enact them is a part of the art and science of reality television. So, how does this influence the presence of Black women on reality TV? Well, it's very problematic that, and what I believe that Kim Kardashian era is what brought back the notion of a big behind. Now, hip hop culture is always Southern hip hop. We as Black people understand the power of the ass. Okay, but it wasn't until it was introduced by this white woman that all of a sudden it became a signifier of desire across the board. So you have all these white women getting big asses and getting big lips and wanting to look Black, wanting to look like our rhythm, but never feel our blues. And so there was a shift in the notions of beauty. And what did that mean for us as Black women? Well, one of the things it meant was that we became caricatures of ourselves. That a lot of times on TV now, when we see Black women, they are big hair, big makeup, big ass, big personality, all of these kinds of things they're trying to, leverage for publicity, for stardom, for celebrity. And we don't even know how to show up to the table anymore just to be ourselves. And I think that has also carried over in just regular life. You know, everybody wants to date a baller. Everybody wants to be with a hip hop artist. Everybody wants to be a video vixen. Everybody wants to be an influencer. Everybody wants somebody to pay attention to them. But all of it comes at a certain price. It comes at a price of adding another layer to your understanding of self. And for some, that has been an amazing moment. Tabitha Brown's a perfect example. Tabitha Brown, she was just being herself, and she's still her most authentic self, and that's what's so appealing to her. And her authentic self happens to be a woman who is vegan, who has a husband, who has children, who has a family, and lives a very traditional life. So that's one way in which we could see someone taking their who they are and kind of elevating it to a persona that was viable for them in a positive way. Melissa Ford, Buffy the Body, you have all these other kind of women who are like vixens. Kenya Moore, she was on Real Housewives of Atlanta. Then they start recruiting celebrities to be on these shows, which makes it problematic because then you don't have that reality anymore. What you have are actors showing us their lives. And that was very different than the origins of reality television, which were people really like in this fishbowl being surveyed and having these real lived experiences. And there was no script, there was no context to how they should engage or act. They were just themselves. I'm trying to do is show you how we are still unseeable to this day. That even with all the strides, that we still are not really seen and understood because we are still looking for, as Black women, we are still looking for signifiers outside of ourselves that aren't, that don't represent us, don't look like us, and don't have our best interest. What are some other things, other ways in which it affects the community? For me, I always think about the people who are on the screen. I think about the PTSD they must have from being in some of these shows where they're actually having physical altercations with men and women, where they're actually pregnant and then have an abortion, or they miscarry, where they actually marry and their husband cheats on them and has a whole nother baby outside of the marriage that everybody knows about and everybody has to live with. Then we also see people who start to indulge more in alcohol and drug abuse. All of these things affect our community. And why do they affect our community? Because those things are considered signifiers of what it means to be Black and successful in the eyes of some people. Tiffany Pollard was a young lady from New York who was her most authentic self. She showed up to a competition because she wanted to win. I believe she really did have feelings for Flavor Flav. I believe that she was her most authentic self, but I'm sure that came with a price. And so while we're watching people live out their lives, some of us are actually emulating what we're watching people live out, even though it's toxic, even though it's not healthy. And so then we begin to carry the baggage of those kinds of realities. And sometimes we have a difficult time distinguishing between what is real and what is not. And I don't say fake, okay? I don't use the word fake with reality television because if it's fake, then it's acting because it's an art. It's not fake. They're acting. If you make some shit up, it's acting because you're on television. You're acting. It's not fake. You're acting. You're telling a story. Reality television became an actual genre and became an actual medium of social media entertainment that we had never seen before. And because of that, we should have recognized some of the writing that was going to be on the wall with Flavor of Love for one of the first Black reality television shows of its kind. It was the highest, I think in 2006, I think I mentioned in 2006 that that show got more ratings than sports. That's unheard of. But then what does that mean? That means that people are watching us. People are watching Black people. People are watching how love is defined. People are watching how womanhood is defined. People are watching how social engagement is defined. People are watching how friendships are being built and orchestrated. People are also watching betrayal and watching people do anything for money and attention. So in essence, it compromises our humanity. And for a lot of Black women, I feel like our humanity has been compromised because we are so focused on the external that we don't really think about what internally in the composition of who we are makes us beautiful enough in and of itself. We don't need anything else. So what can we do? How can we do better? We can understand that this shit is entertainment. And that yes, some things are really playing out for people's lives, but it's not your life. And you don't have to adopt that lifestyle nor that habit. We also need to get back to forging intimate relationships with one another instead of this transactional type of relationships that we form that are birthed out of this genre of, getting and giving and exchanging, money and sex for fame and stardom. All of those kinds of things are messages that really do shift our value systems, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. And I think we also should find joy in the multiplicities of it. Because for me, when I was younger, I used to be embarrassed when I saw somebody Black do something in public that I felt was not becoming of a Black person. But that was based on my respectability politics. I'm not the God nor the police of respectability politics. And when I realized and got that out of my head, I found joy in seeing women who were different from me. I found joy in seeing women who got their asses done. I found joy in seeing women who wore, 50-inch weaves. I found joy in women who, were a little over the top and extra. I started to see them as women. They're not just objects because we were objectified. And I think that's one of the other challenges that occurred is the objectification of Black women. We already were objectified. I mean, I could literally, and I plan to, I can literally trace this back to the 1700s and the way in which we were seen and viewed as Black women. It's not just something that's unintentional that just popped up out of nowhere. There's no such thing. Everything is intentional. Everything that you see around you that has been structured and institutionalized and orchestrated is intentional. What you need to figure out is, does it fit your value system or does it not fit your value system? So, what I've learned to do is find joy, being able to recognize their humanity, um, and understanding that for Black women, our humanity was never given to us. We've always had to fight, and we're still fighting for it. We know we're human. We know we're human beings that deserve decency and dignity, but we have not been given that opportunity. Television shapes the way we see ourselves. And for me, I've allowed reality television to kind of be a space where I merge my theory and practice, where I think about friendships, where I think about women, and I even think about my own self image. How am I showing up? I just have so much compassion for them because they're trying to figure it out in front of everybody. And that's not the most beautiful thing to do. I really grew from watching reality television, and it taught me how to really decide how I wanted to live and show up in this world every day because of it. And I'm grateful for that. And I am not apologizing for anybody's behavior. And I'm not apologizing for how it's morphed because it is just another iteration of who we are as Black people, which is complex and multifaceted. So shout out to Tiffany Pollard. I will forever see you as the reality star icon because you did it in a way that no one else did it. Next time you watch a reality television show, think about me and think about some of those things. How are these women showing up? What are the storylines? How does that intersect with what's happening in the real world today? I think you'll be surprised that you would learn. And I think you'll find value in these stories of women who are ultimately just trying to find their way in the world and find a space they can call their own. This is the Unseeable Black Woman's Podcast. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. This is Dr. Meredith Davis. Deuces.